God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows how it's killing you. But there's a kind of love that God only knows. God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. But God only knows the real you. There's a kind of love that God only knows.
Welcome to the 16th episode of Your Journey Is Not Over. Happy Thursday, everyone. My name is Tanya Pearson Randolph. This is my own personal journey, and the expressions and opinions are of my own. I own all the rights to my personal journey, and to Your Journey Is Not Over. Neither are to be used, copied, or edited in any way without my consent. First off, I want to correct myself from my last podcast. The date was April 16th, 2024. Don't know why or how I misspoke that date several times, but I did. With that being said, let me get started. It was 1983, and gosh, this year was a complete roller coaster. Where do I begin? I was still talking and seeing my brother's friend a lot. He would call every day after school, and I would see him sometimes through the week and always on weekends. He got to where he made sure I had food, or would bring me food his mom had cooked. It was nice to have someone that cared enough, and without me ever asking, he just stepped in. So grateful. Also, that year I got to go on a field trip finally. I was staying with my grandma when I could. Seemed the only time that my mom had a rule for me. Again, if she was mad at my grandma, I wouldn't be allowed to go stay with her. It punished both of us. That was a lot of time that was wasted that I could have spent with my grandma. I could have learned a lot more, made more memories with her. I do remember taking my permission slip with me to her house. Of course, she knew all about the field trips. I didn't get to go on. And this one was special, and somehow I wanted to go. Little did I know this field trip would be special to my grandma, too. It was to Chicago, Illinois, a huge field trip. Never knowing, might not have ever known, had it not been for this field trip, but my grandparents had lived in Chicago, Illinois when they were first married. And as my grandma always said it, my grandpa worked at the Milky Way candy bar factory. Of course, it's Mars Candy. Funny side note, about 15 years ago, my oldest uncle, the nice one, used to come and visit me a couple times a week for coffee and just to talk. We discovered that our favorite candy bar was Milky Way, never really making the connection until we talked. So my grandma wanted and even paid for me to go on this field trip. She even made my mom sign the form in front of her, so there would or could be nothing that could stop me from going. She wanted me to see the big city and the museums that she remembered so well. I truly think she was as excited as I was. It was fun and it was exciting, and so much to see and learn all in one day. It was a 4-hour drive one way on a big bus, so we didn't get a lot of time at each museum. So much to see, such big buildings. It was fascinating. The next thing I remember is my brother graduated from high school that year, and within days after graduation, he left for boot camp for the Army. I was so heartbroken, even though he didn't live in the same house as I did, and he lived in another town. It was just nice to know that if I tried hard enough, or I called a lot of times, I could get a hold of him. And hearing his voice always calmed me down, reassured me. Now he was going to be what seemed like a million miles away. I remember taking him to the bus stop and waiting for his bus. Looking back, he was so strong and brave and so determined to make a way for himself and get out of this area that we call home. It was the only way out of here, and he took it. That day was crushing for me. I see why he did it now, but then at 12 years old, I felt abandoned all over again. I know that was not what he intended for me to feel. He would have never hurt me intentionally. But it was his way in a sense of escaping and leaving everything behind and breaking cycles. He had to save himself, and I do get it now. Then, though, it was a hard day watching him get onto that bus and going into the unknown, never knowing when or if he could call me. I needed to hear his voice for my own security, to feel safe and protected. My brother was my security my whole life, the person who made everything okay for me, knew how and always what to say to me. Now he was going miles and miles away. It's still early summertime, and my other brother and his friend were around a lot, going out to eat, drive-in movies, and yes, after that much time getting to know each other on the phone and together a lot, and all the deep talks that we had about my abuse and trauma, we had bonded, even though there was an age difference, which seemed to bother him more than me, if I'm being honest. It was just when we were around each other or talking, there didn't seem to be a difference. Remember, I didn't look nor act my age. So we started out as friends, and over time, things grew into a relationship, a boyfriend girlfriend thing. He was always aware of my age and was always a gentleman with me. And of course, knowing about my trauma like he did, he never tried anything with me. He told me a couple years later he purposely wanted to wait until I got older. A perfect gentleman. I just remember that summer having so much fun with him. Of course, I practically lived alone, had for a couple of years, so I could come and go and have my brother and his friend over anytime I wanted to. Most of the time, I had a girlfriend from school hang out with us too. Wasn't that social yet, but I had a really good best friend that I spent a lot of time with. I would talk openly with her also. So it was mainly the four of us hanging out. Again, going swimming, going to the drive-in movies, watching night tracks on the TV every weekend. Was during this time I started smoking cigarettes. I'd always been told by my mom and my grandma to light them their cigarettes. This began when I was really young, and I really don't think there were any warning labels on cigarette packs then. So I guess it was a habit I developed young and without really being aware of it. I never had money, of course, to buy them, so my best friend at the time would buy them and leave them with me so she wouldn't get caught with them by her parents. Smoking is just another example of how fast I was growing up. About the middle of summer, it was time for me to go to Tennessee. I always looked forward to that. I would ride with my aunt to Tennessee, and she would take me to my great aunt's house, the one with the business. Her house was like my home base when I was there visiting everyone. One afternoon, she was fixing my great uncle's lunch, and she was out of milk. She threw me her car keys and told me to run down the road to the country store and get some milk. I never talked back, and I always did what I was told to do. So, okay. It's funny now, but I remember getting into her big town car and being like, okay, what do I do? I had never driven before. I had rode my brother's dirt bikes, and my brother had a go kart once, but never had driven a car. Again, I have to do what my great aunt told me to do. To say I was scared is an understatement. I guess back then, and being in the South, they didn't worry about if you had a driver's license. All she knew was she was busy and needed milk, and I was the gal she sent. I did it, made it safe and sound. I was made to drive again that summer, but this time straight up a mountain and in a Jeep. Oh, it gets worse. It was a stick shift. So that would be the day and the way and I halfway learned how to drive a stick shift. A lot of popping the clutch and rolling backwards. I thought I was never going to get up that mountain. Once up the mountain, I was standing by a tree, just staying out of everyone's way. And the next thing I knew, there was this loud noise, almost like a bomb went off. I truly think I seen my young life pass before my eyes that very second. What I didn't know, had no clue, was I was standing right next to a rattlesnake, and my older cousin seen it and fired his shotgun inches from me and killed the rattlesnake. Just thinking about that memory, I start laughing so hard. I truly thought I was a goner. Every time I hear a shotgun go off, even at funerals, where they do the salute, I know it's going to happen. I see them line up with their rifles, but I still jump a foot each time they fire their shotguns. This summer was definitely one to remember. A couple nights after that, my cousin called and said she was hanging with some friends at the country store and for me to come and hang out. I asked a neighbor of one of my great aunts if I could borrow their car, a 1965 red Mustang, just like my boyfriend's back home, but it wasn't a stick, it was an automatic. I remember driving that night, and it was a lot different at night, a lot of curves that I didn't remember or hadn't noticed during the day. I always loved being in Tennessee and always dreaded when I had to leave to go back to Indiana. Only this time, the trip would be a lot different than previous summers. And little did I know, my life was about to take a drastic turn. Everything as I knew it was getting ready to change. This concludes my podcast today. Everyone have a great weekend. Make it a great weekend. Please join me Tuesday Always remember, your journey is not over. God bless.
God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows how it's killing you. But there's a kind of love that God only knows.